My name is Sheila Lamb, and I'm with the Virginia SBDC Network. For those of you that are not familiar with our organization, the Virginia Small Business Development Center is a partnership program between the U.S. Small Business Administration, George Mason University, and local host institutions throughout Virginia. With 26 locations across the Commonwealth, we provide training and technical assistance to small businesses in their local communities. Our one-on-one advising services are available at no charge. Today's webinar, Trademark Basics, is presented by the Virginia SBDC Network in collaboration with the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. We are recording today's presentation and it will be posted on our website, virginiasbdc.org. Due to the large number of participants, everyone's microphone is muted, but if you have questions during the presentation, you can type those into the Q&A box. We have also enabled the live transcript function, which you can show or hide via your own meeting controls. And now it is my pleasure to introduce our presenter for today's session, Christina Calloway, an attorney for Trademarks Customer Outreach with the United States Patent and Trademark Office, the USPTO. Ms. Calloway began her career at the USPTO as a trademark examining attorney, and during her tenure, served on a term dedicated to reviewing sound and motion trademark applications. She has spoken and volunteered with numerous local and national organizations, educational institutions, and businesses in educating small business owners and creatives about intellectual property. Throughout her career, Ms. Calloway has sought to merge her personal passion for the arts and professional pursuits in public service and has been awarded recognition for her service and leadership professionally and personally. She is an executive board member of the Northern Virginia Fine Arts Association and serves on the City of Alexandria's Commission for the Arts. A proud U.S. Army brat, Ms. Calloway obtained her Juris Doctorate degree from Howard University School of Law in Washington, D.C., and Master's in Public Administration and B.A. in English from Georgia Southern University in Statesboro, Georgia. Please join me in welcoming Christina Calloway.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Again, my name is Christina Calloway. I'm an attorney advisor in our Trademarks Customer Outreach Office, and today we'll be speaking about or discussing trademark basics, what every small business should know now and not later. In the interest of time, I'm just going to go ahead and jump right in. Thank you for that introduction, Sheila, and let's go ahead and get started. So before we begin, I just want to kind of go through our agenda today, what we will be discussing. We'll definitely be going through some trademark fundamentals, those definitions, so you understand what is a trademark, why am I here today, and then the benefits of federal registration, as well as some ideas of how to select a mark. The filing and registration process, we'll go through that a little generally, and then I'll be providing some resources of how to go about that filing and registration process, and any other resources that the USPTO has that may be helpful to you during this particular process. We will have an opportunity for questions at the end, so just go ahead and drop those questions in the chat so that we can get those answered for you and get you on your way to starting this trademark process. Okay. So first, let's go through our trademark fundamentals, right? Why are we here today? What is a trademark? So here I am showing you probably some very well-known trademarks that you know and that you can see and recognize immediately when you see them. Trademarks are a type of intellectual property, right? They're not property that is like real estate that is tangible. It's intangible. It can be bought, it can be sold, it can be inherited, it can be traded and protected just like real property, but it's a type of intellectual property, something that comes from the mind, something that you think of and create that can provide protection for goods and/or services. So a trademark identifies the source of goods and services. So when we see these very well-known trademarks, we see them in connection with some type of good and or service. For example, when you see that apple with a bite on the side, you may recognize those goods as smartphones or computers. When we see Coca-Cola, we connect that with soft drinks. When we see those double arches, we connect that with burgers, French fries, or maybe even the restaurant services. When we see Amazon, we may connect that with, I don't know, everything, right? No, Amazon has delivery services, goods Goods and products. So we connect it with that. Google may be connected with telecommunication services. That Nike swoosh with footwear, Ford for automobiles, Samsung for electronic goods, and Microsoft for their computer goods and or their software services. So as you see, the trademark is always connected with some type of good and services with these particular marks. So these are just some really popular ones to just give you well-known and popular ones to just give you some understanding of what a trademark is and how it identifies the source of goods and services. So let's get right into that definition. It identifies the source of goods and services. It distinguishes goods and services from those of another party, right? So when you go in a store and you ask for a Coca-Cola, you don't want the cashier to a little bit about. Okay, I do apologize. I had a little technical difficulty, but hopefully everyone can still hear me and see the screen. And we're just going to move right along. So these are the things that a trademark does for you. Identifies the source of your goods and services, distinguishes them from the goods and services of another party, and provides legal protection for your brand. So let's talk about what a trademark does not do. A trademark does not mean that you legally own a word or phrase. So when we think about Apple for smartphones or computer services, Apple is a common general word. Let's see, let's reshare the screen here. Give me just a moment. Apologize for this technical issue. Let's see. Okay. Should be showing now, and I do apologize for that. So a trademark does not mean you legally own a word or phrase. So we're thinking about Apple for computers and those smartphones. Apple is a general word that everybody can use, and it does not mean that Apple legally owns the word Apple in connection, legally own the word Apple or that particular phrase, right? It just means that they own that particular word or trademark in connection with their goods and or services, in connection with those software goods, in connection with those smartphones, with those computers. It does not mean that you can stop other people from saying a word or a phrase. So Apple can't stop us from saying the word Apple, and they don't get paid, or we don't owe someone money every time we use a word or a phrase that is their mark, right? The mark has to be in connection with goods and or services. It's saying that it provides you with protection to have the exclusive right to use your mark in connection with those goods and or services, right? So we know what a trademark does, and these are what it does not do. So when you're coming in to file an application with our office, it doesn't mean that you're going to own those particular words or phrases. It doesn't mean that you can stop others from using them. It doesn't mean that there's money owed to you every time someone mentions them or says them. It just means that you have the exclusive right to use these particular words or phrases in connection with your goods and or services, right? So the definitions are that the trademark indicates the source of goods and products. So we want to always make sure that we're using marks or trademark in connection with goods and or services. The word trademark is used interchangeably, but if you have services, it is technically called a service mark, which indicates the source of services. But the wording is used interchangeably, and you'll hear me during today's presentation saying both trademark or service mark, or trademark for both, or the word mark. But it basically means the same thing, that it is a mark that indicates the source of your goods and or services. Okay. So there are traditional types of mark, common source identifiers that you may be thinking about. That could be a brand name, that could be slogans, that could be a logo. A logo might have some type of literal element, right? Words and phrases, and then some design elements as well. So these are common source identifiers that you may have for your goods, indoor services. So let's just look at some examples here. One of our most popular, which is Coca-Cola. Here's Coca-Cola in a standard character format, right? We never really see Coca-Cola displayed in this manner, but they have a registration for that standard character format where there is no stylization. It's just the plain font so that they can use it out in the marketplace in any way that they would like to display it, right? The way that we're most familiar with. So a brand name would be Coca-Cola. And then the slogan, "It's the real thing," is also a mark that can be associated with their goods, indoor services. And then logos, as shown here with the always, the bottle, and the Coca-Cola, the way we normally see it. Coca-Cola, some design elements, those literal elements, that would be a logo. And then Coca-Cola also has registration or configuration mark for the shape of its bottle, right? You can look at the shape of a glass Coca-Cola bottle and know that it is Coca-Cola without even seeing that particular brand name, because the shape of the bottle also indicates the source of those particular goods. So that can be your brand names, your slogans, and your logos. So there are also non-traditional types of marks, right? Our traditional types of marks are marks that just have words or numbers or design elements that you may have put, graphic design elements that you have made put in your logos. But there are also non-traditional types of marks. We just talked about one specifically, which is the configuration mark, which is the shape of the Coca-Cola bottle, that distinctive glass bottle shape that indicates the source of those particular goods. So anything that functions as a source identifier might be eligible for registration. And if you have a non-traditional type of mark, you have to think about that as you can think about that as well as something that you may want to file with the office to be protected. So sound can be a non-traditional type of mark. When you think about the NBC chimes, right? If you're in another room and you have the television on and you hear those three chimes, then you know that you're on channel NBC. And that may be used in connection with like television broadcasting services, right? Color is a non-traditional type of mark. So the brick that you see on the screen, it looks like a brick. If you've ever done any work on a home or seen inside of the house and that installation, and it might be the color pink, that is a mark for fiber installation by Owens Corning. So they have registered the color pink in connection with those particular goods as the mark for fiber installation. Scent and smell can be a non-traditional type of mark. So let's go back to childhood, and we're thinking about when you open up a canister of Play-Doh and that scent that hits you. You probably can think about it now, or if you have children, and you can probably smell it now. That scent in connection with those clay modeling goods is a registered trademark. That scent, it's defined or described as a vanilla musky scent in connection with those specific goods. Motion can be a type of non-traditional mark. If you think about at the beginning of a movie, that MGM lion roaring, that sound as well as the motion of that lion is a trademark. Holograms in the center here, you'll see that hologram for Upper Deck, or what most people understand as a hologram mark is on like credit cards. American Express has one in connection with their credit card services. And then we talked about that configuration or that shape configuration mark in connection with those goods and services. So even as we're thinking about these, because you may be saying, well, a sound, anyone can use it. Remember that your trademark has to be used in connection with those specific goods and or services. It has to identify the source of those goods or services. So let's do a quick knowledge check before we move on, and just think to yourself, does a federally registered trademark mean that you own a word or a phrase, right? Remember, we talked about Apple for software goods or for computers and smartphones. Does that mean that you own a word or phrase? And the answer is no. It means that you only have the exclusive right to use that word or phrase in connection with your goods and services, right? You're not buying a trademark. Someone doesn't owe you money if they're using those words. You don't own those particular words. It just gives you that exclusive right to use it in connection with your goods or services. And another one here. Do you have to use your business name as a trademark? So go back to thinking, we talked about those common type of source identifiers, brand names, logos, slogans. Do you have to use your business as a trademark? And the answer there is no. You can, but you don't have to, because you're making a determination as a business of what you want to use as your trademark in connection with your goods and services. So you can have a different business name, and then you can have a different brand name or slogan or logo in connection with your products or in connection with your services. So you make the determination as the business owner or the owner of the mark of what you would like to use as your mark. Okay. So now we've talked about those basic fundamentals of understanding what a trademark is, right? It's an indicator of source for goods and/or services. We're going to go into the benefits of federal registration. Why am I here? If I have a trademark, what is the benefit of going through the process with the USPTO to correct those, to provide you with that type of protection? Okay. So there are traditional ways of creating marks. There's common law and federal registration, and we'll briefly go through both. So common law is the rights that are created once you start to use your trademark, right? When you create your trademark and start to use it in commerce, that creates those common law rights, which are just basic rights that allow you to use that particular mark in use in commerce, okay? And just remember, it has to be used in commerce, not something that you've just created and you haven't connected with your goods and/or services and are actually providing to others. It provides you with limited geographic area where the mark is used. So say you have a particular mark, you have goods and you're selling at your farmer's market every Saturday in connection with your goods and or any services that you're providing. It's providing you just with those rights in that particular geographic area. So if you're doing it in Virginia, it only provides you with those rights in Virginia. But what if you want those broader rights? That is something that you would be considering your federal registration for, which is provides you with those nationwide rights. Now, you can receive protection in your geographic area. You would go to your Secretary of State's office and you can get that state registration, but just be mindful that it would just be limited to the geographic area where you are using your mark in connection with your goods and/or services. And the symbols that you would use now, if you haven't received any federal registration, are TM for trademark in connection with goods and SM for service mark in connection with services. But you would not be using the letter R in a circle, which indicates federal registration, right? So if you have those common law trademarks, or you do have those common law trademarks, if you're using your mark in commerce now, and it's just limited to your geographic area, you're able to use the symbols TM or SM. So what if you want to have broader rights, right? You say, okay, yes, I'm selling at the farmer's market every Saturday, but I'm also selling online. I have my products online and people can buy them from anywhere in the country. And I'm shipping all over the country where that's interstate commerce. And these rights are created when you federally register your trademark with us at the trademark office. So it gives you rights to you that protection in your mark nationwide in all 50 states and in our US territories. So that's something that you want to consider if you're doing interstate commerce. So if you're just focused on your business in Virginia and you're not going to be selling or shipping or doing anything else anywhere else, then you may consider the state registration. But if you want those broader rights, then you would be looking at the federal registration. And this provides you with the legal presumption that you own the trademark. It's giving notice to the public that you are the owner of this particular mark in connection with these goods and/or services, and provides you with those rights in all 50 states and all US territories. And again, like I said, the notice to the public about those rights, right? When you file an application with the USPTO, it is public record. And when you receive that registration for your mark, that is going to put the public on notice that you now are the owner, your business or you as an individual is now the owner of that particular mark in connection with your goods or services. It also allows you to bring action concerning trademark in a federal court, right? You can sue somebody for trademark infringement, or you're able to send those cease and desist letters if you see someone using the mark for similar indoor related goods. You're able to send that letter out letting them know, hey, I have a federal registration and this is the registration certificate, and you need to cease using this particular mark for the same or similar goods. And as well, this is another thing that a lot of people don't know about, is that when you are selling goods and you are receive that registration, you're able to record your registration with the U.S. Customs and Border Protection. So if you know you have goods or products that are often knocked off, so whether they be handbags or electronic goods or software goods, something of that nature, you can record your registration with U.S. Customs and Border Protection, and they will be able to have on notice that these particular goods may be coming in with your trademark to stop them from being imported into the country and starting that trademark infringement. So we don't want that. So you're able to record that with them. As well, you can use your federal registration in the US as a basis for filing in another country. So with the federal registration with the trademark office, you're only able to receive protection nationwide and in our all 50 states and in our US territories, but you would not be able to receive that protection in other countries. You would have to go through another process in each country. So this is something to think about if you are manufacturing in another country, if you know that you're selling in another country, your business also is in another country, that you can use that US federal registration as a basis for filing in another country. So that's something to think about as you're going through your business plans. And the symbols that you would use there are, you don't have to use the TM and SM. You're able to use that R in a circle now, because that means federally registered with the trademark office. So you don't have to use that TM and SM anymore. So let's just do a quick knowledge check about those benefits. Are you required to register your trademark with the USPTO? Is this something that is a requirement, or it's voluntary? Is this something that you can choose to do? And the answer is no. Federal registration is not required. It's not an obligation that you have, right? If you have those common law rights, as soon as you start using your trademark in commerce, you have those rights, and you can file a state registration, or you don't even have to do that if you don't choose to do so. But it's not a requirement. So that's why we talked about the benefits of federal registration, about why you may want to do that, but it is not a requirement for you to register with our office. And just one more, does registering your trademark with the USPTO give you international protection? So when you receive that federal registration from the trademark office that provides you with that protection in 50 states, in our US territories, does that allow you to also receive that protection internationally? And the answer is no. Registering your trademark with the trademark office here in the US only provides you with that nationwide protection. But as we talked about with the benefits, it may, once you receive that registration, you can use that as a basis to file in another country. It just makes it a little easier to go through that process, because they see that you already have a federal registration in the United States, right? So we talked about our common law rights benefits with trademarks, and we also talked about that federal protection and what those benefits are. We've talked about what a trademark is. So we're going to move right along into a discussion topic of selecting a trademark and some things that you want to think about when you're doing that. Okay. So just some things to remember. When you apply to the office, our mission is to register a trademark that is eligible for registration. It doesn't mean that you are buying a trademark when you pay that fee for the application and you apply. It doesn't mean that you are buying your trademark, right? You don't own the words. You can't charge someone to say those words. You're not buying your trademark. You are applying to seek federal registration. There is no guarantee that your mark will be registered. The fee is paying for the examination of your application, right? That going through that particular process, but that doesn't mean that you're buying your particular mark. So your goal should always to be finding a mark that is federally registrable and legally protectable, because since registration is not guaranteed, not every trademark is going to be registrable and not everyone is going to be enforceable. So when you're thinking about what you want to select as your mark in connection with your goods and or services, you want to make sure you're looking at those two things. Is it going to be registrable? And is it going to be legally protectable? So that's two things that you want to kind of think about as you're thinking about what type of mark do I want to have be the source indicator for my goods and/or services. So there are two main concepts that I want to delve into, and these are some of the most common type of refusals, but that I want to delve into as far as that registrability and that protectability of selecting your trademark. And those two main concepts are the likelihood of confusion, which often results in a likelihood of confusion refusal, as well as the strength of your trademark, the descriptiveness refusal. So there are others, but these are the two that are some of the most common. And we'll talk about those because they can kind of help guide you of the type of mark that you want to create in connection with your goods and/or services. So the first, selecting a trademark in the likelihood of confusion. The concept here is that you want to avoid confusing consumers about the source of your goods and services. So remember that trademark is going to, we want a trademark that's going to distinguish our goods and/or services from those of another party's, right? Coca-Cola has a different mark, even though it's for the same goods as Pepsi, and they may be competitors, but they're two different marks, that brand recognition that distinguishes those two particular marks in connection with those goods and or services. So we want to avoid that consumer confusion. And the main proponents of that test are that we're looking at marks that are confusingly similar. And then we're looking at whether the goods and or services are similar or related. So we know that a trademark has to be used in connection with goods or services. And if there is another mark that has been applied for or is currently registered, the examining attorney that would be looking at your application is going to be making a determination if they see another mark of whether that mark is confusingly similar to your mark and if the goods and or services are related. When we're looking at similarity of the marks, we're looking at whether they look alike, whether they sound alike, whether the meaning and connotation of the mark is the same, whether the commercial impression of the mark is the same. And we're looking at related goods and or services. So they could be identical goods and or services or related goods and services, right? Goods and services that may be bought by the same in the same place, sold by the same business. Some things of that nature is what the examining attorney would be looking at. So let's just look at an example here to reinforce those concepts. So the registered trademark is T-Markey for pants, and then you're going to file your application for T-Markey for shirts. So let's look at whether or not this would be refused or would be allowed. Your mark or your application would be refused or be allowed based upon these two particular marks. And the answer is that it would be refused. So again, first, we're going to look at the marks to see if the marks are similar. And here we can see that they're identical, right? They look the same. They sound the same. They probably have the same meaning and going to give off the same commercial impression. And the registered mark is for pants and your mark is for shirts. Are those two goods that are related? Are they often sold together? Would a consumer look at these particular marks in connection with these goods and think that they come from the same source? More likely than not. So this would result in a refusal. And that's a determination that the examining attorney is going to make when they're looking at your application. Let's look at another example. So the registered mark is T-Markey for pants. Would you think this would be refused? And the answer here would probably be yes. Okay. These marks, although they may look a little different, they do sound similar, or they could be pronounced in the same way, T-Markey and T-Markey. And then those goods and services, shirts and pants, right? A consumer would see those and would say, hey, these look like they come from the same source, right? Because you can buy shirts and pants in the same place or on the same website, etc. And let's do one more example, changing those goods up a little bit. So the registered mark is T-Markey for golf flags. And I'm not a golfer, so I'm not sure. You may be thinking to yourself, when I'm looking at this, we've already said, okay, these marks could possibly be the same, but are the goods? So maybe here they may not be, this may not result in the refusal. And I'll tell you my argument why they may not be. While the marks may be a little bit the same, consumers may not have an understanding of shirts and golf flags being sold by the same source, right? So I'm, like I said, I'm not a golfer. If you are, or you know, hey, I can walk in a golf store and buy golf flags and shirts, then this possibly could be refused. I would also be looking at the connotation of the marks as well, right? T marquee and then T marquee. T, the word T is going to be most used or understood to be in connection with golf. So maybe there's a different connotation or commercial impression there. So maybe I would say this might not be refused. On the other hand, you might say, I'm a golfer, and yes, these possibly could be refused because they sound alike, and these goods can be sold by the same source. And again, that is the determination that the examining attorney, when they're looking at your application, would make if they were running into this particular registered mark and then your mark coming in as T marquee for shirts. So how would an examining attorney even see that this particular mark has been registered? And that is through a search or a clearance search. And that is something that you would also need to do in selecting your mark to make sure that you're not running into this issue or that you already see this before the examining attorney does. So on your own, you can do a search in the USPTO database, which has federally applied for and registered trademarks. Those are any registered trademark is going to be on that database, as well as anything that has been applied for, even though they have not received a registration for their application, is in the queue to be reviewed. And you can search on the USPTO database. It's free. You can do that 24/7. You would be able to go online to uspto.gov and conduct a search to see, hey, let me see if my mark is out there. Let me see if someone has already registered it, or let me see if someone has already applied for it in connection with the same similar goods and related goods indoor services. And also you just want to do an internet search. So that's one option when you're looking for those who have not federally registered, but they have common law rights and marks. So you want to see if that particular mark is already out there in connection with the same goods or services. So you would just be looking, doing like a simple internet search to see if the mark is out there. You can also hire a private attorney, and they'll provide services to provide a comprehensive clearance search. So that's going to include looking in the USPTO database and the applications that are listed there, those already prior filed applications. They're going to be looking at the state trademark databases, right? Because someone can file for state trademark registration. They're going to be looking at business name registries where someone's mark might be listed there, foreign trademark databases, as well as on the internet. So and a private attorney will be providing a very comprehensive clearance search for you. You can do it on your own, or you can hire someone privately to make sure that they're finding everything when you're selecting your mark and coming to you and consulting with you about whether or not this would be a strong mark for these particular goods indoor services, and whether or not you're going to run into any issues with another owner of a trademark if it has already been registered or they already have an application in prior to your filing your application. So let's do a quick knowledge check again about those differences when we're looking at likelihood of confusion. We want to make sure that we're selecting marks that are distinguishing from another party's goods indoor services. Okay, so we have Exceed. Your trademark would be Exceed for agricultural seeds, and then registered trademark is Exceed for live plants. So again, that test is if the marks are similar, do they sound alike, look alike, have the same meaning, same commercial impression? And then we're looking at whether the goods and services are related. So here, whether the goods are related. And I would argue that this would probably be refused, right? These marks sound alike. They could possibly look alike. They sound alike. And then I'm sure agricultural seeds and live plants, or I'm sure I could find evidence that agricultural seeds and live plants are sold together or sold by the same source. So this would most likely result in some consumer confusion, and this in your application might more than likely be confused. So that's something to think about, that likelihood of confusion when selecting your mark. So let's look at the strength of the mark. So we're going to go into a descriptiveness or the descriptive of refusal when we're looking at that particular concept. So we want to avoid using trademarks that fail to indicate the source of the goods, whether or not they're just going to describe what the goods are, and they're not strong enough to really indicate what the source of those particular goods are. So the test here is, do they merely describe the goods and or services? A descriptive mark is going to be merely descriptive if it is describing the ingredients, the quality, the characteristics, the features of the goods, the function, the purpose, or how it's used, the intended user, those types of things. So if you think about apple pie for potpourri, that's descriptive of probably the scent of the potpourri, right? So a feature or a characteristic of those particular goods. If you think about bed and breakfast registry for lodging reservation services, so it describes that you're probably going to be able to go to a registry and look for a bed and breakfast for a reservation, for accommodations and lodging and reservations for that. So it's descriptive of either the function and purpose of these particular services. So that's something to think about. And I'm just going to show a little graphic here about that descriptiveness spectrum. So on the very bottom code is generic marks. Generic marks are just what is something called, the common name for something. And you probably don't want to have that as your mark or come in for that as your mark. Descriptive is going a little higher, but it's still a little cold, right? It's just describing something or quality or characteristic or feature of the goods and or services. A little higher, a little warmer is suggestive, and they just suggest something about the quality of the goods and or services. And then the hottest or the strongest marks are those that are fanciful or arbitrary, right? There are words that are either made up or a word that is a common word, but it's used in connection with goods and services that it would not normally be related to. And we'll go through those really quickly so you can see the differences. So the first is that really, really cold at the bottom are those generic terms, common everyday name for goods or services. So anything that we might use, if I wanted to come in candles for candles, candle is what you would call a candle. So that would be a generic term. It is highly unregistrable. So here, just an example, milk for dairy-based beverage, right? Milk is a dairy-based beverage, and we need to use the word milk for beverages, for a dairy-based beverage. But say, for instance, like there's a brand called Milk Cosmetics. Now, milk is not commonly used to describe cosmetics, so it is registered. But if the cosmetics, say, for instance, included milk, or that was an ingredient of the cosmetics, we might say, hey, that's generic, or you can't, it's descriptive of a particular aspect of those particular goods, and you would not be able to register that particular mark. So that's something to think about. Now, there are words that are registered trademarks that we think are generic, but they're actually registered words. We just use them in our common language, right? When you say you need a tissue, you might say, can you hand me a Kleenex? Well, Kleenex is actually a registered mark for facial tissues, but we use it in common everyday language. But that doesn't mean that that wording is now generic, because it is a registered trademark. Descriptive marks directly describe something about the goods, right? We talked about that function or purpose or ingredients or characteristics or features of your goods and or services. And these are unregistrable on the principal register. But there's a caveat here, except with the showing of acquired distinctiveness. So I'm just going to explain that really quickly. So descriptive marks, right, they're describing something about the goods and services, but you may have evidence to show that, hey, I've been using this in the marketplace with my goods and or services, and they have acquired distinctiveness. A public consumer would know that my mark in connection with these goods and or services identifies the source of those goods and or services. It is a heavy burden, but you may be able to show that or provide evidence to the office, to your examining attorney, to say, hey, my mark has acquired distinctiveness in relation to these particular goods or services. An example here is creamy whip for whipped topping, right? So whip explains what the goods are kind of generic for whipped topping. And then creamy is describing some type of quality or characteristic of those particular goods. So creamy whip is descriptive of whipped topping. Okay. As we're moving up that spectrum, up that thermometer, it's getting a little hotter. This is suggestive trademarks suggest a quality of the goods, indoor services, and they are registrable. So for here, copper tone, for the example, copper tone for suntan lotion, right? You're not going to actually turn to copper, turn copper. That is kind of like suggestive of like the skin changing color or something of that nature. So it is not descriptive of what's going to actually happen, right? So it is suggestive of what the goods are. So now we're at the top of that thermometer where it's really hot with fanciful trademarks. So these are invented words with no meaning in any language. So I just mentioned one, which was Kleenex, right, for facial tissue. We don't know what that means, even though we use it kind of in a generic manner, but it is actually a registered trademark, and it is an invented word. Xerox for photocopiers, right? We use that in a generic way, but it is a registered trademark, Xerox for photocopiers. You may think about Kodak for cameras, or Pepsi for soda. These are can also be called coined trademarks. They're invented words. They're fanciful, and you're using them in connection with your goods or services. And then those arbitrary trademarks are actual words, but they have no association with the goods and services. So I've talked about one many times here and showed their trademark, which is Apple, for those smartphones and for computers. It has nothing to do with computers, the word Apple, but it is an actual word. We can think about BlackBerry for smart devices. It is an actual word, but it has nothing to do with smart devices or smartphones or PDAs, things of that nature. So that's at the very top, those fanciful and those arbitrary marks. So let's do a quick knowledge check before we move on. Bicycle for bicycles. Bicycle for playing cards. So which one would be registrable? And if you're thinking bicycle for playing cards, you're correct. So bicycle for bicycles, that is generic. We talked about that at the very bottom of that thermometer. It is cold because that is the common everyday name that we would use for bicycles. And bicycle for playing cards would be registrable because it is arbitrary, right? It's an actual word, but it has no connection with playing cards per se, just like Apple for those computers, or BlackBerry for PDAs, etc. Right? Now we're going to go through the filing and registration process. So we've learned everything we know about trademarks, about the benefits of that registration, about what we may consider when we are selecting a trademark. And now that we know what our trademark is, we're going to go through the process of filing and hopefully getting that registration. So a quick infographic, you're going to file an application. It's going to go through an examination process with an examining attorney. There's an attorney at the office who is going to review your application. There's going to be a publication period. Basically, when your application is published, we are putting the public on notice that, hey, this owner has come in for this particular trademark. And if there is any opposition, if there's anyone who thinks there is a likelihood of confusion, something of that nature, they can alert the office and we will review that. If there's no opposition, you're going to go through to registration. Okay. And you file your registration using the trademark electronic application system. So you're going to be filing your application electronically. There's no paper filing. And then there are two filing options, the TEAS Plus, and the fees for that is $250 per international class. And I'll explain what the international classes are in just a moment. And then TEAS Standard, which is $350 per international class. Now, you may be looking here and me thinking, wait, why are there two different fees for these particular applications? So the TEAS Plus application we want to incentivize you to provide us with more upfront information about this particular application. So you have your trademark, and you're going to indicate what your goods and or services are. And we have a trademark identification manual, and we're going to ask that you specifically pull out those IDs or that identification of your goods and services from that manual. This makes less work and time for the examining attorney to kind of review your application and get it through to publication and then registration. And say, for instance, hey, I don't have goods that are in that identification manual. I've created something that is not yet in that identification manual. I need to be able to insert or write in my own goods and/or services. And that would be the T standard, which is the $350 per international class. Those fees are determined by how many classes you include in the application. So international class, remember, it doesn't mean that when you're filing your application or getting your registration, that you're going to be able to get that international protection. International classes refers to the identification of the goods and services. There are classes 1 through 45 that kind of are buckets for everything that you can think of as far as goods and/or services. And they are called international classes because we have agreements with international entities for these particular identifications. But you may have an application that has maybe class 25, which is for clothing. And then you say, hey, I also am going to sell handbags, which is going to be in class 18. Or I'm also going to make jewelry in connection with my clothing as well. And that's going to be in class 14. So that is 3 separate classes. And you would pay a fee for each class. You would pay a fee for 25, pay a fee for class 14, and pay a fee for class 18. So that's how those fees add up. Or you could just have one class, which is just going to be the $250 should you choose the T's Plus application. You can have as many goods in one class that fall into that class as you would like to, and you would pay one fee. So for clothing, you could have shirts, skirts, footwear, hats, everything that is in class 25, and you would just pay that one fee. The same with if you had your jewelry in class 14, you could have necklaces, earrings, rings, whatever is in class 14, and just pay that one fee. Okay. And our application requirements are that you provide us with a drawing of what your trademark is, a listing of those goods and services, which we just discussed, an application filing basis. And I want to quickly go over this. So you ultimately have to show the office that you are using your mark in commerce, right? That's even how you get your common law rights. Once you have your mark, you have to be using it in commerce to get those common law rights. And even for the federal registration, you have to be using it in commerce to get those to get that registration. But you may file saying that I'm already using the mark in use in commerce, and I'm able to show evidence of that, and you can get that registration. Or you can say, hey, I'm starting to work on a particular product or particular services, and I want to go ahead and start that process of protection, even though I'm not currently using it in commerce. But I have a bona fide intent to do so within 3 to 4 years. You too can file an application as well with the office. You will ultimately have to show in another filing with the office, which is subject to another fee, that you are currently using the mark in commerce in order to ultimately get that registration. But you can go ahead and think about that if you say, hey, I already have a trademark. I'm not quite using it yet in commerce, but I want to start this process to protection so that when I do, I can show the office that and go ahead and proceed to that registration. Okay. You're going to be providing us with contact information for the trademark owner, and then that filing fee of the $250 per class if you're using the T's Plus application, or the $350 per class if you're using the T's Standard application filing options. Let's quickly go over our common basis for refusal. So we went through those, that likelihood of confusion, that merely descriptiveness. So those are kind of things that you want to think about when you're selecting your trademark. But also your mark could be geographically descriptive of the origin of your goods and/or services, right? So if you have Florida oranges for oranges, that is going to be geographically descriptive of where the oranges are from and then of the type of goods. Your specimen doesn't support use for listed items. So I talked about how if you come in for that intent to use, I intend to use this trademark within 3 to 4 years, but I'm not currently using it. You're going to have to show us evidence or a specimen of that you're using the mark in commerce when you're for any application that you file with the office in order to get that registration. And your specimen, sometimes you get a refusal because it doesn't support that you're using your mark in connection with the goods and/or services that you have indicated in your application. And so normally an examining attorney would tell you, hey, we need you to submit another specimen showing that you're using that mark in connection with those goods and services. And then another common refusal is that the trademark is used in ornamental manner. So this is for a lot of you clothing manufacturers or those who have those clothing goods. You may just put a slogan on the front of a t-shirt, and the office is more likely going to be refused because we're going to say, hey, that's ornamental, because it doesn't show the source of those goods and services. It just looks like a slogan on the front of the shirt. So we would be looking at you to either have a hang tag of that particular mark connected with those goods, or a label showing your mark on those goods, which indicate the source of the shirts, not just some type of design element or slogan that is across the front of the t-shirt. And your registration responsibilities, after you've gone through that process, you've gone through application and review and publication, and now you have your registration, you are responsible for enforcing your own trademark rights. The office does not do that. So you may use your registration certificate to support, like I said, cease and desist letters, or to, if you have to, file or sue someone for trademark infringement, you would be able to use your registration for that. But the office, would be responsible for enforcing those rights. And then you must file required post-registration documents with the USPTO. So after you receive your registration could be lost if you don't file those required post-registration documents with the USPTO. The USPTO does provide notice. They will send one electronic notification each time that you have to provide that post-registration documents, but they are not going to continue to follow up for you to do that. So after you receive your registration, it's within the first 5 to 6 years that you would have to follow up to maintain your registration, and then 10 years after that. So you have to really think about that and stay on top of that, because the office would not be maintaining that for you. And just a quick knowledge check. Are you guaranteed registration of your trademark? So think about that. And the answer there is no, right? When you file, you're not buying your trademark, and it's not guaranteed that you're going to receive a trademark registration. You are filing to apply for this particular mark, but an examining attorney is going to review to make sure that, one, it meets all the requirements of the application. And we're going to be looking at doing a search to see if there's any likelihood of confusion, any descriptiveness, and other statutory requirements to make sure that this can be a registrable trademark. And last, knowledge check. If your trademark registers, do you have to do anything to keep your registration alive, right? Once it registers, do you have to do anything? And the answer is yes, is that you are responsible for maintaining your registration with those post-registration documents, as well as monitoring and maintaining that against any type of infringement of your mark. The office does not do that. So we'll quickly go through some sites to how to find help. And just really quickly, I want to delve into this. So once you file an application for registration with the office, it is public record. So there are going to be entities, law firms that are going to see this information, and they may reach out to you. And we have some resources here just to help you beware of scams where people may ask for money or anything of that nature. The office would not be calling you to ask you for money in connection with your trademark application, right? Once you file your trademark application, you're already paying those fees to the office for that review. And we would not be calling you for additional money, sending you email about additional money. And these are some resources that you can look into to see whether or not an email solicitation or a phone call you've received may be some type of fraud. And just in general, here's the website. We also have some USPTO resources similar to like you're attending this session. There are trademark videos that go more in depth to each subject that we discussed today, as well as some trademark basics registration toolkits to help you kind of get your checklist in order of how you want to apply for your, or how you need to apply for your trademark application. We also provide the Trademark Basics boot camps, which is an 8-week course that allows you to log on and register, and we'll go through kind of each part of the process a little bit more in depth. We actually have like where we'll go through the application step by step. We will open an application and you'll be able to see us going through the application and how to apply. So I definitely encourage registering for that so you can learn a little bit more about each subject matter in depth. You don't have to attend all, you can attend all, or you can just attend the ones that are most relevant to you. And they're all free. Here's some more resources, whether that be the intellectual property identifier, which will allow you to go on and answer a questionnaire about specific types of things relevant to you and your goods and services to help you see, hey, what type of intellectual property do I need, and some resources to go about protecting those things. There are free resources there on that particular link, as well as the USPTO virtual assistant for Trademark Basics if you're scanning that QR code. And don't worry about if you haven't caught these, you will be receiving the slide deck after today's presentation. Okay. And just in general, our Trademark Assistance Center, this is the number and as well as the email address, and they can provide you with some support, just general support regarding the application process and any questions that you may have. Say, for instance, you do receive those email solicitations and don't know if whether that's fraud or not, you can call and see if that is something that they can help you decipher. And the USPTO does not provide you with legal advice. They cannot enforce your legal rights. We talked about that is your responsibility, and they cannot recommend specific private attorneys for you going through this process. Okay. And that's the end of everything that we have today. And if you have any questions, or if there have been any questions that have popped up in the Q&A, I'm ready to answer those.
We do have a few questions still sitting here in the Q&A, so we'll try to get through them. I know we're tight on time. We're going to start with, I found out that a foreign government has registered a trademark for one of their government agencies that is the same as the name of my business. Can I still register a trademark in the US?
So that's something that you would be looking at in a search to make that determination of whether or not they have had a registration in the United States, right? And also remember, we're looking at that trademark in connection with goods and/or services. So you would want to see what their registration was for. If it is the same or similar goods and/or services, and also looking in the registration database, the USPTO.gov, USPTO database, to see if this foreign entity also has a US registration. So once you're doing that clearance search and you don't see anything, then you would be able to apply, go through the process to apply. It doesn't mean it's guaranteed that you'll receive that registration. But if you're kind of doing your due diligence to see, hey, they don't have this registration here, I just saw that they have a foreign registration, then I'm going to proceed with the US registration.
Great. Okay, so this attendee is thanking you. They said this is very helpful. What if you wanted to register the word Apple for engineering services?
Okay, so that's something that you have to also consider. Again, those are clearance searches. So, right, you'd have to see if if those marks are identical, right? Apple is probably one of the most aggressively protected trademarks in the world, right? So you want to look at that and see what their registrations are for. They have probably hundreds of registrations, but you would be able to find them in that USPTO database to see if there is any connection with engineering, because engineering could include software engineering, which if they make software would be related or connected with their particular goods, or they may be providing those services. So that's also going to happen in a clearance search, where you're going to try to make that determination of whether you want to move forward with that particular mark for those services if you see any other entity that has the same or similar mark for the same, similar, or related. Remember, it doesn't have to be identical goods and services. It could be merely related services as well.
We have about a minute and we have 7 questions. So I'm going to see if we can get, okay, if I can only afford one right now, what is more important, to do the logo or the brand name?
You make that determination. So if you're already using a particular one, like more than the other in connection with your goods and services, that is a determination that you want to make. I would say possibly a brand name, because you can file that as standard character, right? With no stylization, no font, no color, no design elements. And you would be able to file that as standard character. And if you receive that registration, you're able to use it in the marketplace in any way that you choose. So you wouldn't have, it gives you kind of that broader protection. And then you could come in later for your specific logo, design elements, color, etc.
Once you receive a trademark approval, how frequently do you have to pay for it?
Okay. Once you receive that once you receive your registration, your maintenance doesn't start until 5 to 6 years, and you'll receive that one electronic notification from the office saying, "Hey, in this particular time, this is when you need to file your maintenance registration fee and any documentation in order to maintain your registration."
How long does the process take to get the approval?
Yes. So right now, as far as like once you file an application, there is a processing backlog. So examining attorneys are looking at applications that were filed in February or March of 2023. So we're looking about 7 to 8 months for your application to be reviewed by an examining attorney, and could take up to a year or year and a half for that registration to be actually approved.
And we're over time, but as long, Christina, if you have about 5 minutes, I do
Okay.
too, and we can go ahead and go through.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So what is the refusability for a similar trademark name with a similar logo, but in a completely different class? For example, computer software versus transportation.
Yeah. So we kind of so see if an example I can use. So like Dove for soap and Dove for candy bars, right? They have the exact identical name, but we wouldn't think that a soap manufacturer or someone who has soap goods is also selling candy, edible candy that you can eat. So if those you can have the same mark, but if those goods aren't similar, related, connected, the examining attorney is making that determination to say, no, a consumer wouldn't see these marks and think they come from the same source. So there is a possibility that you can have an identical mark to someone, but if there are completely different goods and or services, that you would be able to receive that registration.
If you are filing your name, slogan, and a symbol that goes with your name, is that just a single fee, or do you have to pay for each separate component?
No, you don't have to pay for each separate component. So if you are using everything all together, so if we think about that always Coca-Cola with the circle and then the Coke bottle, those are words, the words, the phrase, and then design elements and colors all in one logo. You could file an application for that. But if you want separate protection, so say that sometimes you use your brand name by itself, and sometimes you use the logo by itself, or sometimes you use, a different type of design by itself, then you would have to file an application for each in connection with your goods and or services. So think about Amazon. Amazon has a registration for just Amazon, that standard character app. They would have to file an application for that. But then the smiley face with the arrow design, they would have to file another application for that if it's being used alone. But they may have Amazon in connection with that smiley face logo, then they would also file an application for that both together.
If you are filing with the USPTO, is there any reason you would file with your state, or does the USPTO review and approval supersede the state review?
So the state trademark is for those kind of common law rights, and it only provides you protection within that state. So if you're doing that state trademark registration in Virginia, it's just going to give you that protection in Virginia. So if, say, someone is using your mark in another state, in Georgia, in Maryland, in DC, or something like that, you wouldn't have protection there. The federal registration provides you with that protection nationwide and in the US territories. But you can file for both, but it's going to kind of, I guess it just determines like whether or not you want both, because if you get that federal registration, that's going to give you that protection in Virginia and everywhere else as well.
Okay, great. And one more question. What happens if you are denied on your registration application? Do you have to stop using your name and slogan immediately?
So no, you have those common law rights. So remember, we talked about how that federal trademark registration is not is voluntary. You don't have to get a federal trademark registration, but if you go through that process and you say it gets denied, or you receive a refusal or something of that nature, you can still use the mark in commerce. You're just not going to have that federal registration. And you may say, if you got a likelihood of confusion, you may run afoul of another registered trademark owner who may be reaching out to you to cease and desist using that mark, even though you don't have that registration. But you have common law rights. As soon as you use the trademark in use in commerce without any type of registration, whether that be at state or federal, you can use your mark in connection with your goods and services.
Well, we got through them all. I appreciate
Okay.
those who stuck around. And Christina, thank you for sticking around. And I would like to thank everyone for attending today. You will receive an email with a link to the recording and to the slides. If you'd like to sign up for upcoming webinars or access recorded webinars, please visit virginiaSBDC.org/training. These resources are designed to be used in collaboration with your local SBDC advisors. You can sign up for a free and confidential session by emailing help@virginiaSBDC.org or via our website. And we do hope to see you at our next session. Take care.